Welcome to the first lesson in this year's Climate and Nature Summit. In this lesson, we are going to look at food and farming. Before I start, I would like to thank you for taking part in the summit, and I would like to thank your teacher in particular for bringing this lesson to you. So this is an overview of what we are going to cover in today's lesson. So first we're going to look at a brief history of food and farming in Ireland. Then we're going to look at our food today before looking at some really interesting examples of farming in Ireland today. We will then briefly talk about the benefits of growing some of your own food before finishing up. So before we start, I would like you to close your eyes for a moment and to picture a farm. So picture a farm in your head. What can you see? Can you see animals? Maybe you see machinery, plants? What does the landscape look like? So teacher might like to pause the video for a moment to get some feedback on what comes to mind when we think of a farm. Okay, we're going to come back to this later, but for now, let's get started. So first, I would like you to think of what people might have done for food before we began farming here in Ireland. So what types of things did people eat and how would they have sourced their food? Can you discuss this in pairs for 1 minute and decide on maybe 3 or 4 things that we would have eaten before farming? Teacher can pause the video for a moment and then you can come back to me. So people would have hunted for meat, such as wild boar, and we would have also fished, and we would have collected berries and nuts. Because of these approaches to getting our food, because we hunted and we gathered, these people are often referred to as hunter-gatherers. I wonder, would anybody like to guess when farming was introduced to Ireland? So when did we stop hunting and start keeping animals in enclosures or paddocks? And when did we start growing our own crops rather than looking for nuts and berries? So if you want to have a chat about that, you can, and come back to me. So we began farming in Ireland over 6,000 years ago, and we call this time in history the Neolithic period in history. So this would be the later part of the Stone Age, when people were using stone tools and stone weapons. And the word Neolithic comes from Greek, so lithos means stone and neo means new. And how do we know then? How do we know that farming began 6,000 years ago? Well, archaeologists have found charred or burnt remains of crops such as wheat and barley, and they can date those back to this time. Let's fast forward to today. Now in Ireland, much of our land is farmed. So what types of food do you think that we can produce in Ireland now? So you can take a few minutes to think about the different foods, such as the meat or the vegetables, that we can produce in Ireland. And if teacher could pause for a minute or two while you come up with your list. So this is the list that I came up with, and I'm sure you came up with lots of different ones. So the first thing that I thought of was apple trees, and that made me think of all the different fruits that we can grow here in Ireland. And then I thought about lots of different types of vegetables that we can grow. I also thought about our cows who give us beef and dairy. I thought about our chickens that also give us eggs. And then that made me kind of think of lamb and pork and other meats that we have here as well. So we're really lucky here in Ireland because we have the potential to produce lots of different types of foods. So we'll come back to that, because what I would like to do now is a little quiz. So I'm going to bring up 3 statements here. I'll go over them quickly with you, and then teacher can pause, and I want you to chat with your friend and see, do you think these statements are true or do you think they're false? Okay, so my first statement is that Ireland imports half of all the fruit and vegetables that we eat. So to import means we buy them into the country. So we buy in half of all the fruit and vegetables that we eat here in Ireland. What do you think, true or false? My second one is that in 2022 we imported 75,000 tonnes of potatoes. So I'm just going to help you out a little bit with that one, because a tonne is difficult to think about. So 1 tonne is 1,000 kilograms. So if you think of a bag of sugar, that's 1 kilogram. So if you could think of 1,000 bags of sugar, that's 1 tonne. And another way to think about it is lots of animals weigh a tonne. So for example, a giraffe, a fully grown giraffe would weigh a tonne. So what do you think about that one? And our last one then is that Ireland exports about 90% of the beef and the dairy that we produce. So to export is the opposite of import. Export means we sell it out of the country and we do not eat it ourselves. So I want you to have a little think about that for a moment. So if teacher can pause and you can chat, and I want you to decide, are these statements true or false, and then come back to me. Okay, so the first statement, Ireland imports 50% of all the fruit and veg. What did you say? Because this statement is false. We do not import, or we do not buy in half of our fruit and vegetables. We buy in 80% of our fruit and vegetables. We buy in most of the fruit and veg that we eat. So I found that really surprising when I found that out. And if teacher wants to pause at any time to discuss the answers to these, please do. So let's move on to my second one, that we import 75,000 tonnes of potatoes. So when I saw this first, I thought, surely, no, we grow lots of potatoes here in Ireland, but this one is actually true. So here in Ireland, we grow 300,000 tonnes of potatoes, and then we import another 75,000 tonnes on top of that. Let's look at the last statement. What did you think? Was it true or was it false? It was true. Ireland exports, or Ireland sells out of the country, 90% of the beef and the dairy that we produce. So let's take a minute to have a closer look at farming today. But before we do this, I want to explain this unit of measurement to you. So the hectare. So hectares are used to measure really large areas of land. So you might have already used square meters in school to measure areas in your classroom or on the schoolyard in maths. But hectares are used for really large areas of land, such as fields or farms. And this is what a hectare looks like. It's a square area of land where each side of the square is 100 meters. So if teacher wants to pause for a moment, if you want to take a look at the meter stick, please do. So I want to start by looking at the size of our island, the size of Ireland. So how big do you think Ireland is? How many hectares do you think Ireland is? So Ireland is 6.9 million hectares. That's the size of the island. So of that 6.9 million hectares, how many hectares do you think are farmland? So again, if teacher wants to pause and you can chat about it and take a few minutes to estimate, please do. So out of our 6.9 million hectares, 4.44 million of those are farmland. So that's about 2/3 of our country is farmland. Isn't that amazing? And this reminds me just how important our farmers are. So not only do they produce our food, so we really, really need our farmers, they also look after most of the land. Now, we already looked at a wide variety of food that we could produce here in Ireland. So I want to just take a look at vegetable farming at the moment. If you remember, we import a lot of our fruit and vegetables. So of that 4.44 million hectares, how many of those do you think are used to grow vegetables? So again, if you want to pause, please do. So in Ireland, 4,237 hectares are field vegetables. So that's 1% of our farmland is used for growing vegetables. So that's an area that is less than County Dublin. So I'll just show you this, it might help you, okay? So it's about 3/4 of the area of Dublin grows vegetables. So again, does that surprise you? Because I was really surprised when I learned that. So right at the beginning of this lesson, I asked you the question, what do you think of when you think of a farm? I asked you to imagine a farm. So when I did that, this is kind of what I thought about. I kind of thought of, you know, the farmer and lots of different types of animals on the farm. And many of us think of this image because if, like me, you're not from a farm, my evidence of farms or my exposure to farms came from books when I was a young child, and this is often the way farms look like in picture books. But this picture here actually is more likely what a farm will look like in Ireland, because here in Ireland we specialise in beef and dairy production. So that is where a lot of that 4.44 million hectares of farmland goes. Okay, so we're going to move away from farming again for a minute, and we're going to take a look at the foods we eat. So in other words, we're going to look at our diet. So we all try to have a healthy diet, lots of fruit and vegetables, and here are pictures of some of the foods that you might eat. So you can take a minute to look at the pictures, maybe your favourite food is there, or maybe there's some foods there that you haven't tried, and if teacher would like to pause for a moment, you can. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to separate these foods into two groups. There we go. So what do you think I've done? What separates the foods on the left from the foods on the right? So if you want to pause again, to have a little chat about what I'm thinking, what makes these foods different from these foods, you can. Okay, well, the foods on this side of the slide are foods that my grandparents would have eaten. So they would have eaten lots of potatoes and fresh vegetables. They'd have had plenty of dairy, such as milk and butter, and I can actually remember the milk being left at my grandmother's door in glass bottles like this one here. Meat and fish would have also made up a part of their diet, but they wouldn't actually have eaten red meat that often. Now the foods on this side of the line, these are foods that my grandparents wouldn't have eaten because they weren't imported or they weren't brought into the country until more recent times. So today we have a much wider range of foods in our diet because we can eat foods from all around the world, foods that can't be grown here, such as pineapples, or foods that can't be grown at a particular time of the year. So for example, we can't grow strawberries in the winter, but we can still import them, so we can still have them as part of our diet. And it's the same in other countries around the world. So countries that wouldn't have traditionally eaten potatoes, for example, they can now import them. And so items like chips can be part of their diet. And this has been called the global diet. In the past, people ate food that was locally produced and locally available to them. But now, all around the world, we are eating similar diets. And while it might appear that we have a much wider diet available to us, lots of different foods available to us, compared to, let's say, my grandparents, the fact is that actually most of us don't eat enough fruit and vegetables. And in fact, much of us are actually eating a much more narrow or much more restricted diet than people in the past. And this idea then of a global with this kind of idea of a global diet, but some scientists also talk about the global farm. So I want you to take a look at these photos now, and I want you to take a guess at where in the world these photographs were taken. So again, you can pause if you want to kind of study them a little bit more closely, and then I'll give you the answers. Okay, so what are we looking at here? So this top picture up here, we are looking at a vineyard in Oregon, which is in the USA. Here we are looking at wheat being produced in Germany. We are looking at pigs in China. We are looking at wheat again in Russia. And here we have a herd of cows in South Africa. So across the world, farms are beginning to look the same, and farmers are using the same techniques to kind of mass produce foods that are often then exported and not eaten locally. And this is another reason why our diet really isn't that varied, or isn't as varied as we might think it is, because there's lots of varieties of potatoes and there's lots of varieties of wheat and there's lots of varieties of tomatoes and so on. But really big global farms are actually only producing a small amount of these varieties, so maybe just one or two varieties of potato, for example. Okay, so let us pretend that this circle here, this circle is all of the farmland that is on Earth. And these 100 people over here, these are all of the farmers that are on Earth. Well, of the farmland over here, 70% or 7/10, the area in red, is owned by only 1% of the farmers. And these farmers, this 1% who actually often aren't farmers but often even companies, these farmers want to make money and they want to sell or export as much food as possible. So they are not thinking about their local communities and they're not thinking about the environment. So we have farms all across the world, often producing only one or two types of food. And we call these monocultures. And monocultures have been encouraged. Around the world, countries have been encouraged to focus on what they are good at and what they can produce really efficiently. And for us here in Ireland, that has been dairy. But we now know that monocultures don't actually work, that they're not good for us and that they're not good for nature. So we're only producing one type of food, such as dairy here in Ireland or wheat in Russia, then we know that countries can't actually feed their own population, like here in Ireland, where we have to import so much of our fruit and veg. And this leads us to the idea of food security. And food security is a country's ability to produce enough food to feed ourselves. But here in Ireland, we have lots of examples of local farmers who are doing really interesting things on their farm. And now we are going to meet two of them. So first of all, we're going to a farm here. Do you know where this dot is? That's right, it's in County Galway. And we are going to Green Earth Organics in County Galway, and we are going to hear from an amazing farmer called Kenneth.
So hi, I'm Kenneth Keevy, and I'm talking today from Green Earth Organics Organic Vegetable Farm, and we're based here in the west of Ireland, in the sunny west. Not always sunny, but today we've been very blessed and we've got beautiful sunshine. So you may be surprised to hear that in Ireland there are very few vegetable farms, and there are especially very few organic vegetable farms. So Green Earth Organics is an organic vegetable farm. We grow vegetables without chemicals, and that's what makes us a little bit different to other farms in the area. So we grow lots of different vegetables here on the farm. So most of you have probably eaten carrots, and I'm assuming you all love your carrots. I'm also going to make the assumption that most of you know what broccoli is, and many of you don't like broccoli, or at least that's what we hear. And I have a 9-year-old son myself, and I know he doesn't like broccoli, but he does like carrots. So we grow loads of different vegetables here, and right behind me we've got kale, green kale. It's very, very good for you, and people like it. Children don't like it, but it's actually quite versatile. We also grow carrots and we grow broccoli, and over there to one side we have 1,100 tomato plants, and most of us think of tomatoes coming from maybe Spain, but right here in the west of Ireland we have the most amazing sweet cherry tomatoes. So here we are, and it's in the middle of August here on the farm at the moment, and finally, after 6 months of preparation, actually 8 months since we started planning, we have our first crops coming out of the ground. And right behind me you have the kale plants. These little kale plants will have been planted by seed into a propagation tray. Then they're taken, and after about 6 weeks they're at a size where we can take them and plant them into the ground. They might be in the ground for another 2 months before we harvest. And this kale will go on producing until sometime next April. So the farm here is in constant change, constant movement. There's always something to harvest, always something to do. And it's a lot of work. It's especially a lot of work because we don't use any chemicals. Chemicals cut the work down, but they're also very bad for biodiversity, for nature, for all the little creatures we share this planet with. Butterflies and bees and birds, all sorts of things like that. So because we don't use chemicals, there's an increased amount of work, and we have tractors in the fields, and we have people working in the fields, people weeding and picking vegetables and harvesting and all sorts of things like that. Towards the end of February then, we have to start preparing the ground for the year ahead. And for us on an organic farm, that means being a little bit more gentle with the soil, waiting for the conditions to be right, because without a good soil, because under our feet there are so many billions and billions of live organisms, and without them there is no food. And that's one of the things I wanted to say, because chemicals going onto the ground disrupt all those lovely organisms in the ground. That means our food isn't as good as it should be. We have 6 beehives on our farm, and there was a chemical that was used in production of food up until recently that really hurt the bees. And me, for one, I wasn't very happy about that. We don't want any of those chemicals on our food. We don't want any of those chemicals in our fields, on our land, and we don't want them touching all these other things that we have to share this planet with. And, of course, and you may or may not know this, what would happen if we didn't have the insects, if we didn't have the bees? Where would our food be then? And I can tell you, it wouldn't be in a very good place. So we have, I mentioned earlier, we have beehives on the farm, and those beehives are put here by the Beekeepers Association of Ireland, and they put them here. And we had a beekeeper who came here a couple of weeks back, Jerry, and he said he manages 6 apiaries. Apiaries are where he has hives in all these different places, and he's never seen bees as productive as he has seen on this farm. Now that's helped because right next to me here in a field we had 2 acres of beautiful wildflowers, especially not just for the bees get a bonus out of it, but we do too. They enrich the soil, those flowers. They're clover. Clover is a magical plant. It helps the bees, but it also helps fertilize our soil. So we have a very rich biodiversity. And do you know what biodiversity means? It means the birds we like to hear singing. It means the bees, the beautiful butterflies, the flies, the bacteria, the beetle, the bugs, everywhere. It's a living organism. And once you introduce chemicals, all of that goes away. But right here, we have had so much diversity. We obviously have an awful lot of trees. We have about 7,000 trees planted on the farm. And that helps, as you can see behind me, with homes and habitats for all these creatures. So that's the benefit of food and nature working together.
Isn't that a beautiful farm? What did you find interesting about Kenneth's farm? Is nature important to Kenneth? Pause the video for a moment to share with your partner your favourite thing about the farm at Green Earth Organics. So next we are heading to Magners farm. There we go. So here's Magners farm. Do you know what county that is? Yeah, that's right. That's County Tipperary. So we are heading to Tipperary and we are going to meet another wonderful farmer called Kylie. And Kylie produces eggs, pork and lots of different types of vegetables on her farm down here in County Tipperary. However, when I got in touch with Kylie, she wasn't actually at her farm in Tipperary. Have a listen to see what Kylie is up to at the moment.
Hello, my name is Kylie Magner and I am the Managing Director of Magners Farm. It's a small farm in County Tipperary where we produce pasture range eggs and pasture range pork. Although it's a small farm, we export a small number of our eggs and we sell our pork and our eggs right across the island of Ireland. I began my farming journey as I really wanted my own children to understand where their food came from and the really important differences about how food is produced. Why is that so important to me? Because the welfare of the animal and the environment they are raised in has a direct correlation to the food they produce. So we have 2 styles of farming. One is industrial, where it's very heavily populated with a lot of animals. And then we have the regenerative model. Our style of farming is called regenerative farming. And at its very core, regenerative farming aims to do no harm. So no harm to the environment, no harm to the animals, and no harm to the soil. In fact, what we really want to do is invigorate the soil. So we don't plough it and we don't spray it with any harmful pesticides or herbicides. What we really want is the animals to do the work for us. If we employ a diverse range of animals, so cattle, sheep, pigs, and hens, they invigorate the soil, which creates a beautiful environment for the best quality grass to grow. And from the best quality grass, we have the best quality food for our hens and our pigs. And that in turn makes a really, really high nutritional product, eggs and pork. For the past 6 months, I've been living here in Australia, in the beautiful Upper Hunter Valley of New South Wales. I've started my own tiny farm while I'm here, while my children finish high school. And you can see in the background, I've been keeping some hens in their wonderful chicken caravan, which I can't say enough about. I just love it so much. I have 3 pigs. One of them is about to have a baby, or a lot of babies, and we're very excited about that. We have 5 Aussie white sheep. You can see here in the background. These sheep are unique because they shed their wool, which means we don't have to shear them. I also have 3 pigs, a boar and 2 sows. Pigs are amazing for doing rehabilitative work on your pastures. They can do a little dig which just tickles the surface of the soil and encourages microbial activity. Then when it rains, there's a beautiful environment for fresh pasture to grow. Smallholders or small-scale farms are absolutely crucial to maintaining food security in all cultures. When we have smallholders producing food, they maintain food supply to their communities, and they tend to grow much higher nutritionally dense food than in industrial situations. I am so grateful to have been given this opportunity, and I'd like to say a big round of applause to your wonderful teachers who have brought us into your classrooms. I encourage you to follow me on social media and see my journey of how we grow our food, and I wish you the very best in growing your own food.
So where is Kylie? That's right, Kylie has a beautiful farm in County Tipperary, and you can find out more about her farm on the Tipperary Food Producers website, but at the moment Kylie is actually in her native Australia. And Kylie is really interested in protecting the soil, and she tells us something really important in her video. She says that small local farmers are really important in all countries and in all cultures. So buying food from local farmers is really important. As we can see, these farmers are working very hard for the environment, and they are also working very hard to produce food for their communities. And if we have local farmers producing lots of different types of food, such as fruit and vegetables and green and meat, well then we are food secure and we have our own food supply. And another way that we can support food security and the environment is by growing some of our own food. So if you want to do something small, you could grow some herbs in a pot on your windowsill, such as parsley here, and you can cut some and you can add it to your cooking. And if you want to be a little bit more adventurous, well, you could try some salad vegetables such as tomatoes. These will need a little bit more room than herbs, but they still don't take up too much space. If you have a garden, a lovely thing to do is to grow a fruit tree. And lots of students do this through the ISSN's Plant a Planet campaign. And another thing you can do if you have some space in your garden is to start a little vegetable plot and to grow some veggies such as peas. So that brings us to the end of our lesson on food and farming, and we have covered an awful lot of information right back to where farming began during the Stone Age, all the way up to the current global food production system that we find ourselves in. But these are my 3 key learning points from this lesson. And the first one is understanding that we are now part of a global system. So across the world, farmland is now owned by a very small number of these big farmers, and countries have focused on becoming experts in producing kind of 1 or 2 types of food. So in the past we had mixed farms, and now most of our farms are monocultures. And this isn't the way nature works. We know from nature and from life that we need diversity. And this kind of leads into my second learning point, which is about food security. Because we focus on producing a small number of foods, we are not food secure anymore. We have to buy in most of our grain and most of our fruit and veg from other countries. And this leads me to my final and the most important thing that I learned from doing this lesson, and that is the really important role of farmers. So our farmers are working really hard. They are the most important people in the food industry. They are the ones working to produce food for their local communities, and they are the ones taking care of nature and taking care of our land. So I really hope that you enjoyed learning about food and farming, and that you found it interesting, and hopefully you might do more now with your teacher. So before I leave you, I just want to say thank you very much for taking part, and thanks again to your teacher for bringing this lesson into your classroom.